hopefully sometime we'll have a presentation on that because it's really fascinating. One of the raffles that we're going to do today is one of my homemade soaps. Now this doesn't have my homemade essential oils in it, but it's a really fascinating subject. But anyway, it's one of the things that we're going to be doing when we do the book drawing, the Frank Tips. So I encourage you guys to kind of think a little more naturally in products that you use and things like that. So that's one of the things that we did this week, this past month. Our aquaponics system is up and running, and we just got our fish in there, so everything's going well there. And then Mike and Brian, you guys aren't going to do a class today, right? Next month, you want to say something about what it's going on? It's going to be, I remember Brian was saying it's going to be interesting to talk. So sorry to put you on the spot.
That's all right. Yeah, the Freedom Tech Workshop is, we've been doing a couple projects. The last project we did was a horizontal pipe garden. Next month we're going to do a biofuel press, and what it is it's a hand press that we're going to build, and we're going to show how to take scrap paper and make fire logs out of it. So we're going to show how to build it, how to use it, and how to make logs. So that's a month from now, right after this meeting next month.
Okay, so everybody save your junk mail paper and newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else have any other announcements or anything? Okay, Ernie had Ron Paul on his show this week, and he was not, Ernie is not going to be here obviously, but, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Don Hancock, I'm Ernie's wife. We publish Freedom's Phoenix, and we also have a digital magazine that it was supposed to be out last night, but we're going to put it off until April 11th, which is next Friday. The topic is hacking freedom and entrepreneurs of the future, and that focus is people that are part of the solution. There's a lot of people that have, businesses that have come out of this, mess that we're in, and are thriving, and so we're going to focus on those people and those businesses. So it'll be out next Friday, so I do apologize for that because I already also wanted to include the New York Bitcoin Conference information, and we'll go ahead and go on. So anyway, Ron Paul interview. He's going to be talking about foreign policy, Ukraine, Russia, Crimea, and that whole situation, how it applies to America and the whole world and everything. Ron Paul always gives a good perspective on things. There's no BS there. He just kind of gives, okay, what's going on for real. He's been there for a long time, so he knows things and everything. So you can trust his opinion. So what I'm going to do, it's about a 10-minute clip. There's a little bit of the interview that's before the live show and a little bit after, so I'm just wanting me to play the whole thing. So just bear with me. I have it loaded up here, so hopefully we won't have any technical issues and we can just get started on that.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. I know I got you just for one segment, so I want to skip to the end and get straight to it. This is what we're going to do. When we come back, I just need to know one. I've been already prepping it in the first half hour for the people, and this is it. Ukraine. The politics stuff, blah, 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 don't care. My thing is that I grew up, I'm going to talk now so I don't have to later and I can just give it to you and go, okay?
Okay, sort of.
Well, the thing is that I don't have, I would, I'd love to have a longer time we can discuss it, but the bottom line is this. I graduated in high school in 79. We got OPEC. We got the Iran hostage crisis. We have, inflation. My first car I paid 23% interest on. I got, inflation or whatever. The Rust Belt started, blah, 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 blah. And you look at the news and everything now, not only is it the same headlines, it's the same people. I mean, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Bush family. I mean, seriously, So the thing is that my question is why? The Ukraine, is it as simple as the military-industrial, we rule you, NATO empire of, just wants more Cold War so they can justify a whole bunch of money? Is it they're fearful of the dollar going and they need some distraction? Is it, because it's getting to the point, I don't think people realize the importance of what you were saying before is that when the dollar goes, everything changes, and it's near going. So this Ukraine thing and a distraction, what did you think he was going to do with Crimea? That's his warm water port. Of course so we got you for a short time. I just, why? That's all I want to know is why. And the government failure of even being, if they didn't cause it, they didn't prevent it. You see my point? So they start waving a mushroom cloud in front of me. They got my attention. I need to go to Dr. Paul. Somebody tell me the freaking truth that was there during all these decades of this crap. So you can tell me, skip to the end. Who's responsible? Why are they doing this? What's the future? And here we go, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Do you love Twitter? Make sure you favorite the LRN.FM Twitter account so you can receive our tweets at twitter.lrn.fm. That's twitter.lrn.fm.
It's time for Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock. To be a part of the show, call 602-264-2800.
Welcome back to Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock here in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey! Oh, this is, we got Dr. Paul on. I want to skip to the end. We'll go right to it. My question is this. Why you cry? These headlines are the same as I remember when I was a teenager. Now I have grandchildren. I'll have 6 grandchildren by the end of the summer. What is the future? What is the world? Is it as simple as military industrial, we rule you, planetary, NATO versus, a Warsaw, pact that's not there anymore? I thought they were supposed to be gone now, and we got in Ukraine threat, mushroom cloud kind of stuff. Who benefits? Why? What do we have to look forward to? Who do I ask? Dr. Ron, Paul, Doctor, help us out, please.
Well, I wished I had a perfect answer that I could do in 60 seconds, so I'll do my best. But I think there's always a struggle between power and money. People who want the power and the money are always wanting to be in control, and I think that's what you're witnessing, and you see it. You see same people, a little bit of change, but then there's a competition there. We hear that Republicans and Democrats fight over this power and money, and yet on the big issues they agree on it. So it is eventually the power and the money, and how do they get people to go along with these struggles? And that is based on a lot of ignorance. The people generally support what goes on. They use the propaganda tool, and they say, the Russians are coming, and therefore we have to, have another Hitler, and we have to get the people to go along with it. But the people buy into this. A lot of them are ignorant about economics. So those who are in charge, they have control of the media and the government. They can propagandize. But I believe it's mostly to the benefit of those who are very, very wealthy, control the money, control the banking system, and right now it's in their interest to maintain a dollar reserve standard. It's been going on for a while. It's amazing that it's lasted as well and operated as well since 1971. But the world still wants the dollar to operate. They don't want it to collapse because, everybody holds dollars. It's their reserve. It's their so-called reserve gold. The Chinese have $1.2 trillion of this, so they're not going to want to do this. Anybody who challenges the dollar standard, really, the internationals come down hard on. So it was first, Saddam Hussein. He decided that he might like to price oil in something other than dollars. Our government didn't like that. Libya talked about it. Other countries, Russia's talking about it now, getting together with China. So this is a real challenge, the people who control the monetary system. The big thing, though, is they're working on a very failed system. This works for a while, and they can do it by brute force, but eventually it collapses. For instance, just look how long they were able to maintain the pseudo gold standard at $35 an ounce. We all that were concerned knew that would break down, and finally it did break down. So this system will break down. I think that's what we're witnessing today, the breaking up and the breaking down of the Keynesian system, just as the communist system broke down. But just look, the power people, if you look at just the Soviet system, the same people who had power in the political system now has power in the economic system. And I think that it's a big struggle, but I still think it's an educational thing to get people to know what the truth is, to know what economics is all about, not buy into the propaganda. That's the biggest job I feel like I have, is trying to overcome the propaganda of the collusion between big government and the media, and of course the ignorance taught in our schools for so long about economics. So that's how I see it very briefly. I don't know whether that helps out much at all, but that's my opinion.
So it is an economics, money, we need more of it, don't have enough, got to keep it thing.
Along with power, because sometimes they have a lot of the money, but still it's power that they want too, and it's associated with the money. People who control the monetary system have the power. Who gets appointed to the Federal Reserve System? They have money, and then they have power, and they maintain that power.
To what end, though, Dr. Paul? I mean, this is, and that's, you've made it very clear, and thank you. But I'm just like, to what end? Does it make them happier? Does it make them? Somebody's got a gun to their head. They need more power. I mean, is it they're just all sociopaths or something? Is it a character flaw of people that rise to the top want to rule me? I mean, why?
I think it's a failed human trait. I think it's been around for a long time. It's sort of like, the very, very sincere liberal who wants to promote, programs that we find distasteful. They're driven by envy. They just cannot stand the idea that somebody else is moved, and they're not necessarily the ones who are looking for money, but they are driven by envy. Others are driven by the desire for power. And I think the thing that you were talking about, they're more driven by power and control of money. Others will be driven by envy. And a few of us are driven by the fact that we think a better world would be one where we are driven to protect individual liberty, individual responsibility, and no force and no fraud. Under those circumstances, I think we'd have a chance for having a lot more peace and a lot more prosperity. And in many ways, in spite of how bad things look, I think this is where we're making some progress. So I get some encouragement as long as I stay away from Washington, D.C.
Thank you. This is the one thing that I'm hope I can get confirmation from you, or at least a comment on. Like I always say, in the end, freedom always wins. It just gets really messy first. That's just basic understanding from my perspective. But my concern is this, especially because you were so successful in changing the culture, which I think if you don't change the culture, it doesn't matter who you elect, it's not going to stick anyway. Okay, so I'm like, if you change the culture, all of a sudden, then we have a foundation upon which we can build all this other stuff. That cultural shift is already big, giant, oh my goodness, surprised the crap out of them, something upside the head from 07 to now, from Ron Paul Revolution. But the thing is that I'm going, okay, it kind of entices, yeah, well, see, he's the exception that proves, I never even understood that phrase until your campaign. I mean, Ron Paul was the exception that proved the rule. Let me tell you what the rule is. Those want to rule me, okay? So I'm going, if there's this anarchist, voluntarist movement out there, a cultural shifting understanding of, look, I don't care what brand rule me, I don't want to be ruled. And that emphasis, that right there, and then you depict all the mechanisms by which they're ruling you, a lot of it is money. It was amazing to people. They didn't understand why they got all these thousands of teenagers up there going in the Fed. Why? Because they understood. They understood. They're going, look, it's the money thing. How hard is this? And he kept trying, and that was never an issue before. I want to ask this one question before we run out of time, is that, is the advocacy of none ruling, does that help your cause, or are we a thorn in the side?
Well, we have to rule ourselves. The responsibility is self-government, and when people realize that. But you're right about the culture. I usually talk about prevailing attitudes, and that is a result of what people have been taught, and prevailing attitudes so often have endorsed government. But I think this is shifting now. There's an attitude now that we should question the Federal Reserve, that we should question drug laws, we should question our foreign policy, and that is all very good. But the prevailing attitude and the cultural aspect of it, where they have to recognize that they do it not because they're sacrificing themselves to some idealistic thing they don't understand, but because it's in their self-interest. It is, it's fulfilling to know that you're responsible for oneself, and also that you're going to live better. You're going to have a better life, and you're going to have less war and less killing and more prosperity. and it has to be based on a moral principle, and people feel good about it. But if it's this loyalty to the government, before it had to be, for most of history, it's loyalty to the king, to the pharaoh, and they become the god. And today, we still have liberals around here and socialists that believe the government is equivalent to a god. And that is what I think we're seeing, a reversal. But I don't think it's just a reversal of a few years. I think we're trying to reverse all of history and diminish this whole concept of this blind obedience to government, like they know what's best for us, and there's several of us now that are convinced they do not know what's best for us.
Thank you. We're in break now. Can you go another segment, or you got to go?
No, I have another appointment, and so I have to move along. But it's nice. Maybe we can do it again someday.
Yeah, please. And I appreciate you coming on. This was, just a thorn in my brain. They're doing it again. And your explanation of this is, thank you. We're out here just advocating, doing this voluntarist, leave me alone-ist thing. Just going, look, man, the brand of rule me, I don't care about. It's this Larkin Rose kind of dangerous superstition, leave me alone-ist thing. And I'm just, that cultural shift that we're trying to do and perpetuate, hopefully serves your efforts, playing with these guys, and better you than me, you know what I mean?
All right, Ernie. Good to be with you. Stay in touch.
Thanks, Ron. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, always a voice of reason. With that, I give you Dave Hodges. He's going to be talking about Russia, Crimea, foreign policy.
We all set? Anyways, Don said I'm Dave Hodges, and I have a little radio show called The Common Sense Show and a website by the same name. And I write on a lot of these topics you just heard about. I agree with a lot that was just said. When Ernie called me, he said, I need to bring you on because from Saturday, because people need to hear a contrary view. I don't really have a contrary view because at one level, I think Dr. Paul is exactly right. But I think the conversation stayed at maybe a level 2 or level 3 and didn't hit the ceiling. The real issue here, and I think that we need to be mindful of the fact of who we're fighting against and what their goal is. And who we're fighting against are the banksters that are basically taking over every government in the world, maybe say 5 countries. And their goal is to impose their version of tyranny upon us. And I think we've seen enough from what they've written and enough of the things that happened resulting from some of the false flag events like 9/11 that they impose after those events. And most of us don't want anything to do with it, or we wouldn't be in this room today. But I think that what we really fail to really be cognizant of is when we talk about international bankers, a lot of people believe that it's just international bankers as a group. There's different levels. And I want to take just a minute to tell you where I kind of split ways with Dr. Paul just to go to a different level. I agree with him when he said, this is all about getting money. True, it's all about getting power. That's the main goal here. And I'm speaking about the Ukraine, Crimea, and really across the globe, and I'll tie all that together. But when we look at international banking, you've got the people from Basel. And there is the group of 12, there is the committee of 300. I've talked to some who have defected, 2 to be exact. And I'm not alone in this. This information's out there. And then at the second level are the central banks, like the Federal Reserve. We look at the Federal Reserve oftentimes as it's the number one goal. Satan's come up from the bowels of hell to wreak havoc upon us. Well, they do a good job of that, but they're not really calling all the shots. And then down lower, what I call the mid-level managers, are your B of A's and your Wells Fargo's and so forth, and Goldman Sachs, and they're the ones that really execute the policies that come out from on high. And there's an event that often gets left out of the discussion, and it's confined to 2008-9 when we talk about the bailouts. And I've only heard a handful of really good discussions that really, I think, adequately describe the bailouts. The bailouts did push us over the financial cliff, and we're on life support now. No question about that. But the credit swap derivatives really put the central banks of the world in a hell of a bind. They took the credit swap derivative idea from Basel, and they saw a way to make quick money, really quick money. And for a while, that Ponzi scheme money game worked. You know, that cow today that I sell to you is worth $100. You can flip it for $1 million. We tie the banks into it to underwrite the loans, and then the financial houses. And pretty soon, you know, pre-Glass-Steagall, 1929, the whole system's screwed. And the central banks are left holding the bag right now. They're fighting for their survival. And I believe, when I look at the facts, that the people on high really did this on purpose because they wanted hyper-aggressive, alpha male central bankers to carry out their policies with zeal and rapidity because they knew they'd have a panicked group. And what we're seeing in the world today is the result of panic, knee-jerk reaction. And it's basically the central banks trying to stay alive. And to try to keep the lower minions in line with the central banks, we see things like we saw 3 years ago. How many of you recall when the Federal Reserve agreed to underwrite Bank of America's losses for $77 trillion? Well, guess what, folks? There's only about $90 trillion in the world. And what do we have, 1 quadrillion plus derivative debt in this country alone? Just us alone. Okay? There's no way to ever climb out of this. Absolutely no way. Well, we're still seeing the competing central banks that now have allied, and they're trying to gobble up the world and to get as much resources to stay one step ahead of the burning bridge. And this is what we're seeing a lot in world affairs today. Now let's go right to the Ukraine, and this theme will really overlay this. If anyone thinks that Putin is a born-again Christian, the savior of the free world that just happened to change sides, well, listen, I get these messages on my website. I get these emails, you know, don't be a Putin basher. The guy's KGB, ex-Russian mafia. Okay, his oversaw the proceeding where they did away with political prisoners. He's no one's hero. He's Tony Soprano in charge of the Soviet Union. He thinks he's independent, but he's not. He still has to collateralize his mineral wealth. No matter how much gas and gold he has, no matter how much he pulls out of the North Pole, which is a whole other discussion about why they're investing $8 million in Arctic fighting equipment in Russia. No matter how much they do that, he still has to go back to the banks. There's no way around it unless we do away with the bankers. So what Putin is doing is he's trying to build his legacy, and I think the bankers are loving it because they see the coming conflict. Putin's trying to resurrect the old Soviet Union. And it's as clear as the nose on my face. He attacked Georgia in 2008. He's made overtures to Belarus. He's threatening Ukraine. He's taken Crimea. And one of the things I want to clear up too, Putin has really committed an act of war. We can say Crimea could be 100% Russian speaking. That doesn't matter if you're talking about justice in the legal system. Crimea was ceded to Ukraine in 1992. It would be the same thing as if Canada crossed the border and claimed Wisconsin because they had some Canadian or French-speaking people there. There's no difference. Or if Mexico crossed the border and seized, yet speak Spanish. It's still an act of war. Now, why is Putin so interested in Ukraine? Ukraine is the pivotal piece in what's going on. I'm not here to sound like an apologist for the U.S. government, but I'll tell you in a moment why I think we should all care about this. And I almost sound like I'm on Obama's side, and those of you who know me know that's the truth. But if Putin gets a hold of Ukraine, and he can solidify his holdings on the gas shipments for Russia to go through Ukraine, 66% of that goes, Germany gets what, 34% of their gas from Russia by way of Ukraine. France is like 27%, Italy's 23%. China just signed an energy deal. You want to know China will fight if there's a World War III? They just told you 2 weeks ago and signed an energy deal with Russia to be partners in some of their energy industries and to become the biggest importer of Russian gas in the world at 38%. Putin needs Ukraine to control Europe. Here's the threat to all of us, and it's really simple. Our military can't stand alone either against China, Russia, or collectively together. We need the forces of NATO. If you are Merkel and you're running Germany, and Putin gets a hold of Ukraine, and maybe some of the rest of Eastern Europe, and he says to you, we'll sell you gas, but we're not taking the dollar. And if you take the dollar, we'll charge double. What are you going to do? Right there, you've just weakened a NATO partner. And then you go country by country by country. I'm no fan of the petrodollar system. But right now, we don't have the petrodollar tomorrow. We don't have jobs to go to. We can't pay our bills. We will be in absolute chaos in this country. Yes, we need to go to another system, but not in this fashion. We're already getting squeezed out of Iran. Iran started selling, as you know, oil for gold to the BRIC nations, of which Russia was the leader in this plot. India, China, Brazil, the most populous nations on the planet are part of this. They're running from the dollar. The one point of disagreement I have with what you heard there, the world doesn't want to see the dollar fail. Some of the world doesn't want to see the dollar fail. The sides have been drawn for World War III if it comes to that. And it's the BRICS versus everybody else. But will the everybody else include Europe and NATO? Not if Putin gets a hold of Ukraine and is able to enforce energy policies. What would you do if you ran the Fed if that happened? Knowing you're going to sit on a soon-to-be worthless dollar, and you may not have an escape plan given to you by Basel. And don't think for a second that the central banks aren't expendable. You'd start a war. And this is why I believe there's going to be a war. Will it be a regional war? I don't know. Will it go nuclear? I have a hard time believing if someone's economy is ready to collapse and their military is destroyed, they won't reach down into their arsenal. I have a hard time believing that our 72 nuclear submarines won't strike out if we lose everything in this country. And I think some of them would do it on their own accord. And if you have heard the scuttlebutt from generals that are speaking out, people like Jim Garrow, ex-CIA, Obama does not have control of the nuclear submarine fleet. Not very much control. It's almost an autonomous force right now. They've always been kind of separate apart from the military. But I'm fearful about which way this will go. The scenario I look at, and what I've written about, and I just sit down and I look at the board and I say, what makes sense to me? We can't stop Ukraine from falling today. Now, in August, that might be a different matter. And I've consulted with a number of military people that say between June and August could be a consolidation period where we could make it really tough on the Russians without using nuclear weapons. And isn't it interesting that Moldova, Ukraine, and I forget one other country in that whole block, they're having NATO war game exercises this summer. It's about the earliest that NATO can mobilize. If you're Putin, are you going to let that happen? If you're Putin, you're going to let your neighbors arm and prepare to be attacked and actually be able to defend? Or are you going to take action before? The ball's in Putin's court. I don't know if he has the guts. Now, I've made the comment, if he acts, he might be drinking radioactive vodka, or his people will. Because I do see us at some level striking back. And if the Federal Reserve is indeed calling the shots with regard to our military, that's a debatable issue, then I do see us striking back in that kind of scenario. Ukraine is terribly pivotal. Now, does that mean that people aren't posturing to make money? Of course they are. Every war we've ever fought in this country, somebody was making money. And somebody made money by keeping the war going. So I don't disagree with what Ron Paul said on that. But when we look at the world's chessboard, if NATO does disintegrate over getting away from the petrodollar and they decide their energy needs are better served in supporting the military expansionist needs of the United States, we stand alone. Then we're in some real trouble. That's why I say I sound maybe like I'm pro-hawk here and American, let's go get them. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the reality of the situation, Putin's outmaneuvered us. How many of you know that Putin has or is making plans to put 9 military bases in 9 Latin American countries involving long-range bombers, submarines, troops? I wrote about it last week. Well documented, right in our own hemisphere, we're going to see this. We're almost seeing a resurgence of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's not just one ship. It's one ship that's growing. Putin sails his ships off our coast. He sends the Iranians over to thumb their nose at us in their ships. What an interesting conspiracy theory. Don't know if it's going to happen. What could be on that Iranian ship? Perhaps 2 ballistic missiles, EMP, take down the power grid of the United States, 2 high-altitude detonations. I first heard about this and really became aware of that technology in 2008 from a very unlikely source, Congressman Trent Franks. He spoke at my church. He showed a DOD video that really said this used to be classified, now you get to see it. It was 2008. And I started to work on it, and the EMP threat is real. And the Russians have the super EMP weapons, not us. We have some, theirs, from what I'm told, are better. So it's grim. And what's going to happen with the dollar? And that's what everyone wants to know. Well, right now, if we don't preserve the petrodollar, I can tell you what's going to happen with the dollar. You'll be burning it, to cook your food on. And that's, and like I said, I do not support the Fed. But in this case, we're between, as American people, we're between a rock and a hard place. And I can see in some of your faces, this is very, very depressing. Yeah, it's hard for me too, because I'm sitting here thinking, what is Dave Hodges and his family going to do? If you look at biblical prophecy, we're not around for the end of it. If you look at the direction curve that our allies are going, we're in real trouble. And at the same time, ask yourself this question. Why is Barack Obama reducing our military to 1940 size? People say, oh no, it's not. Well, I went out and researched it again after I published it, and I found 3 more references to it in government files. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Do we have a stooge in the White House? I don't know what you all think, and we're going to do a Q&A here. Personally, I do. This isn't a wild-eyed conspiracy theory, but I just start by asking myself one question. If we're going to go through hard times, I want to go through it with someone I can trust to stand next to me in a foxhole and do their duty. I want to be led by people that actually care about getting through the crisis. Those people do exist in our military. We have some of those people in our government, not enough. But Barack Obama's not that guy. If you just look at his background, and I'll just give you the name of a couple articles you might want to go check out and follow the links. And the documentation is right from FBI, where they didn't vet him. They didn't vet him for the presidency. They did not vet a presidential candidate. We have the documentation on that. I like to ask people this question. What has this president done? One thing, name one thing he's done to make this country better for people like you and I. One thing.
Maybe go to bat for women's rights, gay rights, environmental causes, as opposed to destroying the earth.
He sold a whole bunch of guns. He voted for their family thing. You know, he didn't do anything for it. You look at his voting record.
You know, I'll grant you that, but we've had civil rights movements long before this president. I can't honestly think of one thing he's done. I mean, what do we have? 101 million people on some type of federal assistance and 97 million full-time workers. What's wrong with that picture?
Maybe it's because there's not enough decent jobs or any jobs, period, in lots of communities.
Right, and that does predate, the causes of that do predate this president. And all you have to do is look at the free trade agreement that made a shell out of New York, or not New York, but Detroit, where the cars, manufactured cars get shipped out of the country. That was not his doing. But isn't it interesting that Obama wouldn't even bail out Detroit? He could pay the bankers. He could pay the bankers. Now, yes, Bush started it, but Obama said he would stop it, and he didn't stop it. He continued it. And Obama continued the bailouts. And if you just took one of those bailouts, all of us could have paid off our home mortgages. So whose side is he on? And that's why I think this is really an important question to consider. Because if we're talking about the winds of war are out there, maybe it'll dissipate, and maybe Ron Paul will be right, and this is just all a bunch of hype, but the hype is based on real military strategy. They've got one heck of a believable scenario if it's just hype. Now, that doesn't mean it's not just hype. But at the end of the day, maybe it will just be a power grab and take away more of our rights because of the boogeyman, and here's the next boogeyman, it's the Russians. Maybe that's true, but the threat is real. And Putin's a loose cannon. And if you know anything about him psychologically, I don't think we can depend on him making calm, rational decisions. I would trust Obama before I trust Putin. And so, well, exactly. But I'm just saying, lesser of two evils. So when I look at this whole situation, is Dr. Paul right? This is just a power grab. This is just a moneymaker. Well, I'll agree with one thing. Ukraine's been raped. The gold's gone. They've got austerity. What are their utility bills up 100% now for a country that can't afford it? So I would agree with Ron Paul on that point that there are Western bankers here. Who the Western bankers control? Dutch. Who was he? He did retirement accounts with basal banks. So yeah, they put their own banker in, no question. So there is validity to what you heard there, but this has the potential to spin out of control. And that's the thing that really frightens me. And if it didn't have the potential to spin out of control, then tell me why we've got mobilization going on in Europe, and there is mobilization. Why are there now going to be 9 Russian bases in our hemisphere? I mean, that's a question, and people say this is just hype. You're buying into the war drum hype. You know, we're just going to spend a lot of money. We're going to lose more rights. I've heard it, but then I asked that question, and I'm not getting a satisfactory answer. Because that literally scares the hell out of me. And here's the bottom line for me. Going beyond what I do when I look at things and try to say, hey guys, this is what's going on when you try to work on it. I got a 13-year-old son. I'm sure as hell not giving him to the bankers to fight. My son will not put on a uniform in this present climate. This isn't a war, you know, that it's an elective war. There's no mistake about it. It's not a war that's necessarily not going to happen. So that was my response there to regard to what Ron Paul said. The bigger question is, I think, what do we do about the bankers? We need to strike at the root. And I don't mean just the Federal Reserve. Now, are the dead bankers symptomatic of what's going on? Well, some people, like Jim Garrow, tell me, yeah, some of them are being taken out and some are being killed by other bankers, so there's plausible deniability if they ever go to court. I don't know the truth there, but the bottom line is we do need to confront bankers. And this problem is not going to have a resolution until we change the system fundamentally. Otherwise, history is just going to repeat itself. Let's say the dollar gets wiped out. We have an economic collapse. Putin controls a lot of the energy of the world. People aren't taking the dollar. He doesn't have to fire a shot on America. He just needs, if he has the patience, he can just sit back and let us collapse economically. That's one scenario that I've considered. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond? Because if we do nothing, you know, the dollar will go away, but something else will come in its place, and it will be a tighter grip of tyranny. Anybody disagree with that? Bitcoin is a possibility. You know, Ernie's not wasting his time for no reason. I mean, I applaud his efforts and what he's doing with Bitcoin. What we have to worry about is like Occupy Wall Street, will the movement get infiltrated? Right now, I don't think it is. You don't think the Bitcoin is a threat to the central bankers? Big threat. Absolutely. If we just started trading and bartering, big threat. I mean, you're seeing the restrictions come in now across the country about garage sales. Okay, that's symptomatic that they're fearful we just drop out of the economy. It's a symbolic message. They don't care about those things, but they're telling the rest of us don't get any ideas. Well, what I want to know here, and this is where I'm going to open it up, and I've got a few more things, but I want to open it up and get your feelings about all of this. Do we worry about with Ukraine? Do we need to worry about the Russian energy alliance that merged the energy economies of Russia and China together? We need to be concerned about military bases going in our hemisphere of someone who is opposing us. What do you all think?
Well, I think that even if you are not necessarily correct on that point, what many commenters have said since this occurred about how this is the first time since Hitler that a country has just aggressively gone in and seized territory based on these nebulous claims and has disrupted the somewhat relatively peaceful order the world has had since the aftermath of World War II. That certainly has occurred. And if we say that in addition to that, this which you described is a real possibility and a threat, then yes, no matter what degree of this we believe in, it's certainly something to watch. I know I am. Especially since we just heard this week, Russia apparently put 50,000 additional troops on the border with Ukraine. You know, why do you do that if you're not expecting to do something? I mean, Putin is not a frivolous, pointless man. He doesn't do things for no reason at all. There's something calculating behind everything he does. Those 50,000 troops may not be for an invasion, but they're there for a purpose. He is doing something.
Show of force. Minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Intimidation is a good word to use there. I totally agree with what you just said. Let me throw one other thing out here too. I was talking about Obama's complicity in this, or possible complicity. Why is it that Alaska has now had to put together, based on tax dollars that they raise from the state, a commission to go to BRAC, the group that decides what bases get closed, which get reduced? Why have they had to do that? Because they've had a plethora of closed bases in the last few years. Why is it that the F-22 doesn't do overflights along the Alaskan coast, and they have not been replaced by an equivalent number of F-16s? Why is it that our submarine patrols along the coast of Alaska have been reduced? This is all stuff military people have told me. Why is he weakening the defenses of Alaska? Because where would you attack first if you were Russia? Well, history says Stalin had the plan. Following the old Mackinder hypothesis, run across that Bering Strait, grab those ports, which is really one of the main objectives of Russian foreign policy, always has been, and that's your ticket into North America. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but it sure as heck looks like it when I look at Obama and what he has not done with Alaska. Right now, if the threat is, as we're being told, and Ron Paul's wrong, and it's not hype, it's real, shouldn't we be taking appropriate action militarily, getting ready? Shouldn't we be in a war mode right now, and we're not? So Ron Paul's either right, this is all hype, or we got a president that's a traitor. You have a question?
I have a question to the statement. Basically, since 1979, when Brzezinski wrote the Grand Chessboard, our plan to control the world, the American empire, has been to encircle Russia and China. You're talking about Russian putting 9 bases in the Western Hemisphere. How many bases do we have directly on the border of Russia? We have done everything to encircle it. The crisis in Ukraine was caused by the U.S. Information Agency pumping billions of dollars in to overthrow the legitimately elected government of the Ukraine. They were a corrupt government, but they had decided they weren't going to join NATO, and they weren't going to what was the other point?
Join the EU.
Thank you. I joined the EU. So we overthrew that government. We installed a puppet in there. The same thing we did in Italy, the same thing we did in Greece. And Putin's making counter moves right now. Just the same thing as Kennedy and Khrushchev did. But they got together, and what most people don't understand, they know about the missiles going into Cuba, but they didn't know that we had first put missiles into Turkey right alongside at that time, the Soviet border. And the agreement that Kennedy and Khrushchev got was, you pull your missiles out of Cuba, and we'll pull them out of Turkey. Well, we've got bases in former provinces of the Soviet Union. I think one of our biggest bases is Uzbekistan over there. Big air base, that's what supplies all the troops going to Afghanistan, the supplies go through there. We have continually put pressure on. When Gorbachev said, okay, we'll let Germany go to the east under the condition that you don't go to the west, and you'll make no attempt to go east. What did we do? We immediately, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, disavowed that, and we started going into Poland, we started going into all these other countries. We've got military bases there. That is a direct historical threat to Russia. Instead of building up our military, why don't we pull some of those bases out under the condition that they pull their bases out and let this out?
And your analogy to the Cuban Missile Crisis is right on the money, because I remember seeing the news clips that are out there on YouTube, and Kennedy said, why should they not have missiles in Cuba if we have our missiles in Turkey? Our own American leadership said that, not the military leaders. The president and his brother who basically stood alone at that time. So those are excellent points, but I think it speaks to escalation. When I'm hearing you talk, okay, we've got ours, now Putin's getting theirs, and they're going to make us feel as threatened as we make them feel. Now, could it be a phony arms race like so much of the Cold War was, all designed for profits for the military-industrial complex? Very possibly.
No, I think we're the ones that are escalating. I'm saying we've got to step back. We've got to step back from this past.
Okay, but Putin is being very provocative. I don't take Putin off the hook. He's been very, very provocative. Let's look what he did. He went into a sovereign nation. It doesn't matter what language they speak. or what their allegiances were. Legally, Crimea is part of Ukraine. That's an act of war. That's provocative.
You don't think our going in and overthrowing the legitimate government of Ukraine was not an act of war?
No, listen, I said it's too tangled and it's escalation.
But I think the Crimeans have every right to secession, and I don't think those elections were phony. I don't think it was because there were troops there. I think it was because that, for hundreds of years, was part of Russia.
See, that's where I have to respectfully disagree. When you bring in your troops and you seize government buildings and block highways and seize the airports and government buildings, and now we're supposed to trust the election. And that's where I would
You're talking about Crimea or?
Crimea.
You're not talking about.
Well, we may as well be. But with regard to that last statement with the elections, you know, I'll tell you the saying that's floating around in my head, you know, from an old Russian. I don't care who votes, but who counts the votes. But, you know, when you have an occupied area, that area was occupied.
You're talking about here now.
Well, okay, but you made some real good points. But to me, I get nervous because it could be escalation. But is it escalation simply to play a game? I mean, is that not a legitimate question? Because if you take Dr. Paul's comments out to the end argument, and he said it's all about power and money. Okay, well, you know, we didn't hear him talk about escalation. Escalation's taking place. Could that be part of the game, possibly, or is it something we need to be worried about?
Also, taking it back to the Soviet Union days, what would our response have been to the premier was at the time got the official talks in Mexico to join the force back?
Well, that's what Germany did in World War I with the Zimmerman note. That was one of the big pushes of the war, so I would agree with that. Yeah.
So our political maneuver is trying to drag Ukraine into being an official member in NATO. How is that not perceived as a threat?
Absolutely.
So how is this not a proactive step of maybe proactive defense or something like that? Where Putin is very, very much trying to play on the historical Soviet Union good old days and show a force with Russia in securing both the military and economic support in the one.
If I were Putin, I'd be doing the same thing.
But I don't see how him outlaying us on the political chessboard means that we now have to go into matters like this.
I hope not. Unfortunately, you and I are making those choices. I don't see the Federal Reserve going down with that fight. That to me is the loose cannon in all this. I'm sorry, who was next?
Dave, two quick questions. Number one, isn't it true that when it came to numerous votes in Congress for war and defense spending in general, weren't the votes of Ron Paul and Trent Franks virtually the opposite over the entire careers? And number two, Dave, you mentioned that Trent Franks spoke at your church. Is your church one of those that believes in fulfilling the end times prophecies, which usually is used to justify unlimited government spending for war and defense, again, which is the opposite of what Ron Paul was doing?
Well, I don't think that's a characterization that's accurate about the church. It was a town hall meeting. It was a site selected.
Okay.
So I think the church had more of a neutral response. I was a little embarrassed over some of the gushing that people did over Trent Franks.
How about the first question about the voting records of Franks and Paul over the years?
Well, let me go back to how I prefaced it. When Franks first educated me on EMPs, he's not the one I take the word of now. I've gone out and done my homework. So he is an unlikely source for me to even listen to. Trent Franks is not my friend. He was part of a cabal back in 2004 that tried to steal my land along with John McCain and some state legislators. And I've written about that on previous meetings. I've been on a number of radio shows about that. So let me be real clear on that. Trent Franks is no ally of mine.
What a dishonest politician.
Well, wait, let me finish the statement here. So I do not support him, but I said it was his presentation of this that led to me going out and doing my own research on it. I still hold the man in great disdain, as I do John McCain. You were next.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm a little bit of an optimist, but is it possible that the monetary collapse could be an opportunity for us to rework this economy, to throw all those ridiculous phony debts, and to create a sound money system based on gold and silver, something like that? the people take back this country?
I remember hearing Charles Guyet's basically say hit the reset button a number of times. That's what your comment
Oh, yeah,
reminds me of.
big fan of Charles.
I think that it could be, but then here's what I come back to. How many days of food and water does the average person have until there's absolute chaos on the streets? Now, what you might be talking about is an end result solution. But also, too, if you don't look at the actions of our own government that have armed themselves to the teeth, 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition for DHS, 2,700 armored personnel carriers that can take an RPG hit without being destroyed. When you look at that expenditure, they've prepped for this. They've prepped for the chaos. And I don't know how many of us will get through the chaos. I mean, after 3 days, don't you guys agree that the biggest enemy you're going to have are the neighbors who don't have? And they're coming to get what they need to survive. So, I mean, so we may end up there. If the good guys win in the chaos, let's assume that good guys win in the chaos and enough of the military joins the people or vice versa, but there's going to be hell to pay in between. Quite frankly, you know, I'm not optimistic about how many people survive that. I think you were next.
Getting back to your premise about why Putin is looking at Ukraine for regulating the flow of the energy to Europe, clarify for me if you can, if the energy in gas and oil and other already emanates from Russia, couldn't he just, with control of the tap at the origin, control and regulate it there? Why would he need Ukraine?
What if the pipelines are shut down? What if the gas doesn't flow?
So in order to hijack Europe, he has to first maintain the ability to? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think there are factions in Ukraine that would blow up as many of these pipelines as possible. The ones that are pro-West. And there are pro-West people in Ukraine. So I do think that's a risk. I think Putin knows it's a risk. But I think if you look at a military attack, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out they're going to paratroop right down on top of those gas lines. They're going to take them immediately with air cover. And you can write the battle plan, it's so simplistic. So that would be how I'd respond to that. And I'm not so sure that the United States wouldn't put forces on the ground to take out those gas lines if Putin makes a move. And I'm not so sure he hasn't been told that through back channels. I mean, to me, if I'm John Kerry, I might have communicated that message when I was over there through back channels. That, you know, you might think you're pulling this, but you're not going to get what you think you're going to get. At least that's what I would do. But then again, I don't trust this president. So I can't say for sure what I think. Okay, we're next.
This goes to your question you positive about could this be a big game? The one thing that I haven't heard you mention, but I did hear Ron Paul mention, is their control of the media.
Yes.
Is it possible that all of this is posturing for good press to accomplish with us, people, what their bosses, the bankers, want to accomplish?
That's a good question, isn't it? It's an excellent question. And it goes back to, is this a real threat that we should be militarizing for, which is what we should be doing if we're really believing we're militarizing. Okay, so either it's not a real threat or Obama's great. Then you go to the argument that you're bringing forward. Okay, then is this just all a big game? The media is being manipulated to whip us into war feeds so they can get more rights, take it away, get more money, get more power. Listen, let's flip a coin right now. Does anyone really know?
The media is being manipulated. I think they're being told to do what this thing is.
Well, they're being controlled. Yeah. Let's make a mistake about it. It's not a matter of telling. It's a matter of they just do.
Yeah.
Look who owns them.
Yep.
6 corporations own 98% of this media. Look who owns these corporations. We start naming the names. You know, Bartelsman, you got GE, go right down the line. Who makes money? Who makes money on the military-industrial complex? The same people that own the media. You know, Ron Paul didn't say that directly, but he may as well said it because he was right in the ballpark with some of his comments. So it would surprise me in 5 years if we come out of this and we've lost more rights, more than that, because, but we kept ourselves free in our moment of crisis. That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, both scenarios are on the table. I'm just saying as an American, when I can look at the chessboard of the world and say, I can see I can see the disintegration of NATO. We've already lost a good portion of the petrodollar's value because of what Iran's doing. Can we lose that in Europe and still maintain our economic solvency? So as Americans, I should be asking those questions. What are you, the government, doing for us to protect our standard of living and keep us safe? And then you're allowing these bases to go in our hemisphere And you're not even saying a word about it in the media. You should be challenging it like Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So something's not right.
That's what
I agree with you. Something is not right. Yes.
In this an act of just revenge, we collapsed Russia in the 80s. Now they're doing the same thing to us.
If you, I wrote an article called The Russians Becoming Part One. You can Google that. And what I did is I went back into books and statements made by Russian defectors. And they talked about exactly what you just mentioned. Undermine us on every point. And particularly, Stanislav Lunev said, get key people in key positions. Basically, you bring the Russian military up to our level with these arms negotiation agreements where it's only one side, not both sides. And then eventually you get key people in position that are sympathetic to a more worldview that would favor the rise of the Russians. I mean, this is foretold now. We're talking 60s and 70s from Russian defectors that were telling us this. So if you want to look at that and go trace the links, the hypertext links, and go read what they wrote, it's called The Russians Are Coming Part 1. So that's a good point. I think someone ever did.
Was it actually the U.S. that took the gold out of Crimea? The Ukraine? Why would they have done that? What was the reason behind that?
It's called raping the country.
Okay.
That's smart. Well, Ron Paul said it right there. It's there to read. Okay, and let's ask yourselves this question. If the dollar goes down today, it's premature for the BRIC nations to survive. From what you read, what economists tell us, economists who have some degree of credibility, if you like Max Kaiser, what he says is it's too soon. But let's say over time the dollar gets eroded by the slow burn process that Putin seems to be into by squeezing us from an energy standpoint that would cause the demise of our dollar over time. What will be your currency if this happens too soon? If the dollar goes down, you have a domino effect of the other currencies collapsing. What will be left standing? Gold. So the old golden rule, he who has the golden rules. That's what I think is behind this. Why is China collateralizing its domestic currency with gold? Now, China does have two currencies, and they're collateralizing their domestic currency right now with gold. India and China have done some experimental trades of using gold. So the BRIC nations are really, let me say the BRIC nations are going to the gold standard, but I think they're clearly beta testing it at minimum. So this is why I think the gold was taken from Ukraine.
There might be one other alternative to your question that you asked earlier. It was about the trade or not. What if we have technology?
Can you speak up, sir?
What if we have technology that makes the military and nuclear weapons that we have irrelevant? What if we've stepped beyond that to a space-based platform with tungsten-based rods that could basically do 10 times more than the nuclear weapon could do? Wouldn't that negate the necessity for the huge military industrial complex?
Well, I don't think you can substitute boots on the ground, no matter what your technology is. Well, we've proven that in war because they put them at Margaret. They were captured by the Russians, and they were actually putting together weapons and aero technology, mostly space-based planes, is the way he eventually described it to me. He gave me the rundown of things the last 2 years of his life. He was terminal, he was on ships in the Navy that had asbestos, and he died of mesothelioma, that didn't have a disease that they called emphysema, that's what he died from. He gave me a lot of information, probably didn't tell me everything, but also gave me a real strong warning, said, if you talk about this publicly though, your mom will lose my pension when I'm gone. So, I confided in a few close people, and I made acquaintance with Jim Mars, who knew about this technology. And I'll tell you specifically what I know. This turns out my dad told me. But Jim and I had a meeting arranged for us at the Phoenix airport. We were pretty careful, and this was about 8 years ago. And we compared some notes. I didn't give him everything because I didn't know Jim that well then. I know him pretty well now. And I knew he knew what he was talking about, and I think he walked away with the same impression. Back in the early 60s, we had vertical takeoff craft that was capable of escaping Earth velocity, at least in the testing phases. And that's as far as my dad's knowledge went with this.
You mean escaping Earth's atmosphere?
Yes, to go into orbit. And there were other things, but what they did is they segmented, they compartmentalized the work so much and so highly secure. You generally only see a segment of it.
they kept my dad on for an extra tour because they get you in, they do your expertise, they move you on before you figure what's going on. Well, they brought him back a second time. He actually went over and did some civil service work at Laurel Air Force Base, and they brought him back. Now he's seeing a flip side of this. And he started to draw some conclusions on what he was seeing. And this is where he drew that conclusion. He said, I think we have a secret space program. He goes, I can't prove it, but I've seen basically what you might consider to be parallel evidence. So to your point, do we have technology? Yeah, now that's my one microscopic piece of information. I don't have knowledge of an entire weapon systems, and neither did my father. Let's put it this way. He told me we were at least 100 years ahead of what the general public knew that was available out there. And the 2-stage rockets, the 3-stage rockets were probably unnecessary. And he did use the word probably. But there is a lot that's withheld from us. So is there technology that could negate nuclear weapons? Well, if you look at Project HARP, if you just go look at the patents held by Eastman Kodak, and supposedly can neutralize the firing mechanism on a nuclear weapon, I would say that's pretty advanced technology that might do what Doug is saying here, that could negate inbound ICBMs. And is this what Reagan meant by Star Wars? I don't know, but it's a real possibility. So Doug, I don't know the answer to your question, but what I do know is there are people fighting and dying in the Middle East today that are basically using 1980s technology. And you've got to think that we've come a lot farther than that since then. So, do we have a lot more? Well, I'll give you another example. This is an easy one. 1966, the internet was developed by the U.S. military as an alternative form of communication if communications collapsed in this country. When did the internet come online for us? 3 decades later. It's typical. Yes?
Dave, let me preface my question by saying that I'm no fan of Obama. Didn't vote for him in the last election. I voted for Gary Johnson and a slew of other libertarians. I'm a hardcore lefty myself. As a protest, I vote for third-party people a lot. When I hear presentations like this that trash Obama for being part of the New World Order or One World Government, something like this, I have to ask the speaker with all due respect. Back during the 8 years of W, were you yourself personally as hardcore against politicians in general being part of this conspiracy, or did you get caught up in the, oh wow, we got to circle the wagons as Republicans?
I'm a reformed Republican, and that predates W. The answer to the question for a lot of people in here will be what you believe about 9/11. I don't believe the official version. I do not believe that people armed with box cutter knives can overtake every single airplane, and that able-bodied men couldn't fight them off. I don't believe that. I don't believe that we found Muhammad Atta's passport, but we can't find black boxes.
And a Quran.
Okay, so let me say this. If you look at, this is what my position has always been about W with regard to this topic. I think he was probably somewhat out of the loop because he's an oaf. But clearly Dick Cheney and friends were involved in this conspiracy, so therefore, by association, W is part of it. And that conspiracy was designed to get us militarily in the Middle East. Also was designed to subvert the Constitution of the United States to freedom of a voice. So long-winded answer to your question. Yeah, I was just as hard, just the attacks were different. But you got to remember, Bush at least was a citizen. I can't say that about Obama. The more I dig into this with Obama, okay, then why does he have 11 Social Security numbers? Why does he have an Occidental ID card identifying him as a foreign student? Why does Joe Arpaio look into this and have documentation on a postman who talked to Obama, admitting he was a foreigner? And I could go on and on. I could talk. Just read the article, The Russians Are Coming Part 2, where I document all
But I had
this.
something there about the flight surgeon, what was his name, that was sentenced to 18 months at Leavenworth because he refused an order to Afghanistan. He'd already been there a couple times. And he was convicted. All he wanted to see was his birth certificate. That's all he wanted to see. He was convicted in the court-martial. They spent $3.5 million to squash the birth certificate subpoena. The birth certificate comes out in April. He's released in May from Fort Leavenworth. When he went in, and his lawyer was on, Joyce Riley, on Power Hour, who was on with the program, and he said, the first question they asked him when he went into Leavenworth for the psychiatric examination, they said, oh, you're the guy that doesn't believe Obama was born in Hawaii. He says, I have never said that. I said, I don't know where he was born, and neither do you. That was the only psychiatric evaluation he had in Leavenworth. He says, I do not know where he was born. That's why I'm not going to go. And they did not dispute him. They didn't call him crazy. They didn't call him anything else.
The lady's name has jumped out of my head, but who was the lady that released the law reform? And what happened to her?
Yeah.
Airplane crash, 7 survivors, she's the only death. I mean, you know, and we're kind of going far afield because here's the bottom line. We have bigger fish to fry than where Obama's from. That ship has sailed, it's water under the bridge. We got what we got, now we got to deal with what we got.
Well, we had to deal with Dougie, who was a freaking imposter. He stole those freaking elections in 2000 and 2004. So if Obama got his, it was sort of like eye for an eye.
You notice when I don't answer, that means we're in complete harmony. Yes, sir.
I did. Oh, yeah. Just a quick comment about the subs. I have a friend who was on one of the subs, and he kind of echoed what you were saying, that he thought the sub commanders were somewhat independent. Because I was writing a book where with a scenario where they were like ordered to attack American cities to quell a revolution, and he said, no, they wouldn't do that. I mean, the sub commanders would. So at least in his view, he kind of echoed what you said about the sub commanders having more autonomy than they're supposed to, you know, than we think they do.
A lot of military people tell me, and I say a lot, less than half dozen I have access to, 2 of them fired casualties of Obama. And they echo exactly what Jim Garrow says publicly. And why that man's still alive, I don't know. But he's echoing what I'm hearing from military sources. The litmus test now in the military, will you fire on American citizens? And the submarine fleet will not. Obama cannot get control of the submarine fleet, is what I'm told repeatedly. And really, it's been difficult for any president because they operate really outside the confines of the military. They got their own uniforms, their own command structure, so it's the perfect group to remain autonomous. But if you look at, we now have, after the nuclear purge, officers in charge of the nuclear program. We've had over 260 senior command officers fired under this president. That is unprecedented. And here's what's amazing, and I'll shift this right back to Benghazi. In the Benghazi situation, we know now that General Ham, when he was running AFRICOM, was going to launch a rescue mission in violation of direct orders from the White House delivered by the DOD. And it was Admiral, his name just jumped out of my head. Admiral Guyette, commander of Carrier Task Force 3, was doing drone surveillance, and those drones were armed, and those drones could have interdicted, and they were going to provide cover. But a guy named Colonel Rodriguez, the number 2 man under General Ham, who was also in the CIA, arrested Ham and stopped it. Guyette was arrested. He was sentenced to Bremerton, Washington under house arrest, and a year ago in March, he was kicked out of the Navy, quote, because he couldn't get along with minorities. Now, wait a minute, you get to be a senior carrier task force commander, and you can't get along with people of different backgrounds, but you rose through the ranks working with these people? Not believable. But here's the bottom line. The military, and I spoke about this when I was here in January, the military leadership is not totally on board with Obama. This is why we're seeing the casualties that we're seeing professionally. Why careers are being ruined, people are being fired. Guyette and Ham are the public manifestation of this conflict. I honestly think, and this is just my opinion, had Ambassador Stevens been rescued, would he have been pissed off enough to tell the world, I did run guns for Al-Qaeda on behalf of the CIA, and this president knew about it? Okay, that could have brought down this government. That's, in my opinion, why he had to be killed. And had that rescue been successful, we might have seen a military coup in the White House. That's just my thinking, and I'm thinking it's just too darn bad it didn't.
The 200 or some officers that have been relieved of duty, what type of people have stepped up in their place? Are they Obama students, or are they similar to the ones that got relieved?
I don't have, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say over years. I have information on that to tell you. Okay, and it's honestly, it's such a good question. I wish I would have thought to ask in some of my sources, and I'll have to. But you've got to think, common sense would dictate that if you're firing someone, you're going to bring someone in that's more favorable to your worldview. Right. So I would suggest that happen, but I don't have that knowledge.
Back on the banks, do you have an opinion on the significance of recent suicide by high-level financial leaders?
Yeah, pretty much what I had kind of alluded to earlier. What I'm told on this, and I'm really the wrong guy to speak authoritatively on this, because it's not something I've dissected, so I'm kind of dependent on the word of people who've looked at it themselves. And what I get from most of them is there are two trails of bodies. One trail is, let's kill the people who could lead complicity to me, and maybe I end up in court, end up in trouble. So kind of like the mafia kills off witnesses of their own. And the second one, I've been told, is revenge. People who have been actively part of something that has subverted something that someone else cared about, and so you have disaffected Navy SEALs and ex-Army Rangers carrying out these hits.
What specific people at what level you're talking about?
Well, when I look at it and see, this is why I'm saying I'm the wrong guy to really speak on this. This is what I get from this. But when I see the Baker Trail, I don't see top guys. I don't see Jamie Dimon going for a dive. I see mid-level guys. And to me, that's pretty weak evidence to come to that kind of conclusion. I'm just repeating, what I've been told in people who say they've looked at it. I'm not totally satisfied. There's something to it. I can easily buy, we're going to keep people quiet. Because, what are they? They're really mafia. Okay? They're mafia types. They think like mafia. They operate like mafia. And what does the mafia do? If there's someone who can expose them, they kill them. And I have no trouble believing that circumstantially. The other one are ex-Navy SEALs involved. Well, I talked to Charles Strange. His son was killed in SEAL Team 6. And I talked to the dad at some length, in a private conversation. And he told me he believes this is going on, based on some of the people he's talked to. But he wasn't able to offer me anything with any proof that I could take on the air or I could write about. So I've left the topic alone for the most part.
What's the number of Bakers that took this?
I don't know. 80.
In the 20s. It's in the 20s.
Getting back here to 260 officers that were fired. My experience with high-ranking officers in the military, 250 of them probably deserve to be fired.
Can you speak up, sir, please?
Said 250 out of the 260 officers that were fired probably deserved it before the time we got in office anyway. The level of incompetence in the high-ranking military structure is absurd.
Okay, let's say that that's true, and let's say it's true 99% of the time. But let me go to what was it, the number 2 guy in charge of the nuclear program. His name is not on the tip of my tongue. But he was fired because he used illegal poker chips. This president has enough time to worry about illegal poker chips.
So the president himself would not be
He rubber stamps it.
But the half of the high-ranking military officers that are academy trained that play politics for a living and like to undercut and like each other in the back, know that he's gambling on the side and see a shot at the top job that they don't have, that they've wanted for years and years.
I think there's no question. There's some legitimacy to what you're saying. Here's where I would have a question on what you're saying, okay? This incompetence, obviously, or this corruption didn't start with Obama. If it's endemic and in the high ranks, it's been there for a while.
Correct. And you have a sudden new change of leadership who you can bend the ear of. You have a new boss who might listen to the guy that doesn't like the previous administration, and you've hated your boss for 15 years or how long because he sold you out 20 years back when you were lieutenant. Now you've got the opportunity to finally take this back and you've been the new boss gives you 15 and improve. That's just how the military ranking structure works.
But we've never seen this kind of turnover ever, not even close. Never. I mean, three commanders in a theater of war. We've never seen anything like that. We thought Lincoln was bad. Okay. One other thought though on this too. I'm trying to think of the best way to respond to that.
Well, so we had 20 years of low intensity, no major threat to actually pressure and train and validate and vet all the senior leadership. And all of a sudden we had 2 major wars going on. You see the struggles. Even Bush changed officers around quite a bit. And there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of angst, a lot of emotions around how poorly we performed in the wars.
All right, let me respond just this way, and then I'll go back to the back here. When you look at what happened in Tagayet and Daham, 2 of the top 4.
So you said Daham's number 2 much?
No. I'm talking in that area, the region. Okay, he's head of AFRICOM, so I'm talking in that structure. At that time, you have to take this in context of what's going on. We were posturing to attack Syria and Iran. We were trying to provoke him. Okay, you took 2 of the 4 top military commanders in a potential theater of war and dismissed them. That's like firing your coach the night before the Super Bowl. That's craziness. You just don't do that. I personally, if we're indeed headed towards war, and we believe, oh, Putin's the big threat, okay, then why would you have this kind of sea change all at one time? It weakens your military at a time you should not be. And then it goes to my argument, why is he reducing the military at this time? See, that's where, I'm not saying there's not some incompetence and corruption, but I'm saying across the board, I don't think that explains it. Yes, sir.
Just 2 questions. Going back to the Ukrainian thing, we've made statements that the government of Ukraine was legitimately elected, but at that election, did not Russia cut off their energy supplies the 6 months before the election and coerce the Ukrainian people to elect that president who was in power? And the previous administration was totally anti-Russian. And was that a legitimate election? Was that not coerced?
I think there's no question. There's posturing on both sides.
And the second question was, you made mention of, you had 3 articles or sources about Obama being a stooge, but then you didn't mention them.
If you go to the Russian Becoming Part 2, okay, and you'll get good links, and if you look at what the Soviet defector said in the Part 1 part of that series, it lays a pretty good foundation for people to go out and even continue their own research. I'm satisfied with what I wrote there and the documentation I was able to put behind it, that Obama's not who he says he is.
Well,
it's not just Obama.
That's out there in the conventional media. When he was running for election in 2008, I was teaching in school, and I did my own research, and the Chicago Tribune wrote a big expose on him in 2007 exposing exactly who he was.
And how much of that did you hear in the debates? If you were really trying to win an election and you're McCain, isn't that going to be the first thing?
I read the article to my class here at Horizon High School, and I was accused of being biased.
Listen, I hear what you're saying, but ask yourself this question. I'm John McCain, God forbid. I can't believe those words came out. But if I'm getting my butt kicked, okay, by this candidate that no one knows who he is or what he's about, but he sure sounds good, I'm going to say, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And there was no whatabouts.
But didn't he think Palin was going to solve it all for him?
The only thing that Palin, I'll tell you what Palin said. This is really remarkable. And I wrote about this. Palin actually said, if Obama's elected, we'll lose Ukraine. She called that in the campaign in 2008. YouTube video, not printed word that can get twisted. Her lips were moving and the words came out. I looked at them and I said, what did you know that the rest of us didn't? That was remarkable. I'm sorry, who was next?
How do you see things, get your crystal ball out, how do you see things working out?
Well, I don't. The dollar, we're in trouble. We're in real trouble. And we need to keep finding ways, and this is where I commend Ernie, a lot of people that do this same work and becoming self-sufficient. Because those that are going to survive are going to be the ones that have the best self-sufficiency skills. We're going to go through some hard times. It doesn't matter which scenario is true. If Putin's going to take us into war and be provocative, in one scenario, or Ron Paul said this is just a lead up and they're just going to put the clamps on us under this guise like they did in 9/11 or protecting us for our own good, we're still going to go through hard times because I can see the end of the petrodollar. The end of the petrodollar has been signaled, and our dollar is married to it. 1944, Bretton Woods. You got nothing backing up your money, and you've got a $17 trillion debt. You've got $241 trillion of unsecured, unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and you got over a quadrillion derivatives debt hanging over the bank's heads. And there's not enough money on the planet to cover that. So I don't see how the dollar is going to survive. So we need to look at self-sufficiency. But we also have to have enough people who know their history that come out of the other end and understand what works and doesn't work so we don't repeat these mistakes. So the people that come out the other side put together a country that means something. And you notice my choice of words. I don't say this easily. Put together a country that implies that we're going to be fragmented for a while. And I think we'll disintegrate into two components when the economic collapse comes. And if that's not true, then ask yourself why every federal agency is militarized.
Yeah.
They know it's coming. Okay, I think you were next and then you.
Dave, real simple, when we're talking to people who don't follow these matters, what's a real simple explanation of what's a petrodollar?
Petrodollar means that a country that wants to buy some form of energy like gas and oil, they come to the Federal Reserve, they purchase the dollar, that gives you backing. It's like having gold behind it. So that elevates their price, but escalates the value of the dollar. Then they take that dollar and they buy energy with it. Now, Saddam Hussein tried to take the euro behind the scenes. That's why he got invaded and eventually hung. Gaddafi wouldn't play ball and become part of the the African Union, and he wouldn't marry his currency to what they wanted to put together in Africa, and he had a central bank that put him in debt, so they murdered him. And really, that's how the dollar has been used. We've been the world policeman for a reason. And when you look and say, is there a new world order where they're trying to get a one world government, a one world economy all under one house? Well, if there is, the central banks are the ones who are doing it. And the Federal Reserve has led the charge since 1944. Because ask yourself, why foreign aid? Why do we go into countries over phony reasons? They always end up being phony, don't they? Every incursion we've had since World War II has been for phony reasons. Okay, who's next? We got about 2 more minutes, I'm told.
So talking about the petrodollar and the Ukraine and Russia being about energy to the EU. And also on the week of the 25-year anniversary of the Exxon Valdez disaster, we had 2 oil spills that week in the United States that I'm aware of, and I don't know if there are more.
Was Great Lakes one of them?
Great Lakes was one, and there was also another small one in the Gulf. And then putting that into context with one of the reasons we went into Afghanistan being is what it's referred to as the, what do they call it, the Saudi Arabia of lithium. We talk about the new energy industry and the lithium batteries and the technology and all of that. So we're talking about all of these things that are energy related. And then we throw the petrodollar into the mix, which is a dying currency. And what are these oil spills do? It just seems too coincidental to me that 2 oil spills happen in the same week of the 25th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I don't know the specifics about the 2. And quite frankly, I'd only heard of the one in Great Lakes. I wrote a 7-part series, actually became an 8-part series, on the Gulf oil explosion. And what I uncovered was pretty shocking. And I'm glad to say I'm not the only one that uncovered it, so I don't have to be the sole owner of ignorance and stupidity. People judge it that way. But what I found 2 weeks before, less than 2 weeks before, people ran from BP stock. Halliburton pulled their money out. In fact, they went and bought Boots and Coots, the biggest oil cleanup firm, 10 days before the explosion. Goldman Sachs pulled their money out. In fact, Transocean, the owner of the oil rig, actually did a put option for preferred insiders the morning of the explosion. I kid you not. Now, can we say for sure that it was a false flag operation, or was it an accident they knew was going to happen? I can't answer that question definitively. I do believe it was a false flag. And I'll tell you something interesting about your president. He's in 2 investment firms. There's only 2 investment firms at the time in 2010, Vanguard 1 and 2. And in Vanguard 1 and 2, they withdrew the same way that Goldman Sachs did. So the president saved an estimated $85 million in losses by not being in those investment vehicles on the day the explosion occurred. There's plenty of evidence to show collusion. And I've only hit the tip of the iceberg. I'm telling you what I'm telling you. There's a much deeper story than this. So to answer your question, is there phony business in these oil spills? Well, at least in that instance, there is. What's behind it? It changed the world's climate. I mean, after that, the Gulf oil stream slowed down because of the massive leakage, and we had Russia and Northern Europe had the worst winters on history for the next years. And some people said they thought a mini ice age is coming. It's too soon to say that. So I don't know what's behind it.
I just had one other question about BP. So BP was actually on contract to be the sort of cleanup insurance policy for the Exxon Valdez, and they were negligent in that. And they were paid for that contract, and their equipment wasn't even there to deal with that, to mitigate that. And then we had the Deepwater Horizon issue with BP, and then this Great Lakes thing is also BP. So
they're pretty incompetent, or there's the connection. I don't know. I don't know, but I'll tell you this. The biggest thing that came out of that is not just the spill. It's what they used to clean it up the correct. And I'll just give you one thing just to kind of whet your appetite. If you do the Great Gulf Coast Holocaust, it's on my website, the 7-part series. But using Corexit is the deadliest oil cleanup, and it doesn't even clean up the oil. All it does is clean up like a lot of the others. It's banned in 17 countries. The EPA told BP not to use it, and they gave the EPA the big middle finger. Goldman Sachs was involved, a 50% owner of Nalco, the company that manufactured it, so there's your reason why it was being used. And what grows in Corexit-laden waters with oil in it? Nothing except algae. And what is springing up along the Gulf today? Algae farms for energy. Now, it's a joke to say it's a conspiracy. There's a big gap in there. But I'm saying it sure points in the direction of maybe where people want to look. Yes, sir. You go first. We'll go back.
Okay, talking about the collapse of the dollar. I'm in Snowbird, Wisconsin. Where would you want to be in the world? Islands, Caribbean, or where would you like to be?
Where would I be? Honestly, if I thought the energy grid was going to stay up and I was going to become an expat, I'd go to Norway because they speak English, the economy's good, and they don't really have enemies that want to take them out. They're non-antagonistic, and my wife has relatives there. And they speak English, and they need basketball coaches, and that might be my ticket into the country.
What's your second choice?
Hunker down here, which is probably what I'll end up doing. Okay, this should probably be our last question. Go ahead.
In 2003, Ron Paul introduced the declaration of war when we invaded Iraq. If we are to become involved in the Russian-Ukrainian dispute, would you require Congress to actually formally declare war for Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution? Or would you just allow these guys to go run willy-nilly?
No, we're on the same side, so my silence.
So if there's no declaration of war by Congress, 218 to 217, 50 plus Vice President Moore voting for it, the declaration of war goes through, then I support it. I don't support the act, but I admit I lost.
Obama only seeks the permission of the UN to go to war. He doesn't care about Congress.
We're on the same side then on that. In other words, don't get involved unless our Congress formally commits our young men and women under a declaration of war as per the Constitution.
Well, I agree. I got one final comment. I'm going to leave my business card out here. If you want to contact me or follow anything we do, I'll just send it right here. You can come up and help yourself to them. And I do agree with you, sir. I've said that all the way along. How many Americans would be alive today if we followed the Constitution? I agree with you. Look, I want to thank you for listening to me and sharing your thoughts. I learned a lot, listening to your questions and your comments today. And leave you with one final thought. I wrote an article that said basically we got to convince the sheep if we have any chance, and I really mean that. The one thing I always tell groups when I speak to them, and I tell my audience, is that we have to educate the people that don't want to be educated. Eventually they'll have a crisis because of the crap going on, and they'll listen to you. Like when McCain tried to steal my house, that's how I found out about the North American Union, because that's what it was about. They want to put a Canex corridor through my house. So this is what wakes people up, and you just got to keep pounding. Because if we don't have numbers, we have no chance. That's my final comment. Thank you.
A lot of information here today, and the bottom line is the world's in a mess, and we need to be ready. We need to grow. Or we at least know how to do it. Even if we don't have the capability to do it, we need to know how to do it. Get garden, get chickens, whatever, aquaponics, and so that's what a lot of us are doing. Real quick, Frank, we have our book drawing. Sure. Book drawing, and we'll do soap first. It's 7774.
7774.
Is that you, Gary? Oh, Berta? Okay. And then we got, we'll draw for 3 books. Yeah.
First chance for a book?
7803. 7803.
Is that 997803?
Yes.
That's me.
First chance of books are right over here.
Okay.
Okay. Now, let's see, who's got it on his face?
You might want to go to the restaurant, Bush.
They're hard to find around here, let me tell you.
All right.
No, close enough.
That's all right, I'll let it go.
You just go alphabetical. All right, one more for the book drawing. 997789.
Oh, it's me?
All right.
Really?
Thank you all for coming.
All right, we had fun today. We'll see you a month from now, first Saturday of next month.